The verse of the day is Acts 10:28, and it says, Peter told them, "You know it is against our laws for a Jewish man to enter a Gentile home like this, or to associate with you. But God has shown me that I should no longer think of anyone as impure or unclean." The title of today's portion of scripture is called Peter Visits Cornelius. And bear with me because I had to do a lot of homework before this one because it requires a lot of context. So I'm going to try to explain it to the best of my ability, and I may get something wrong, but here we go. Back in the day, the Jews and the Gentiles didn't commingle because the Jews lived by the law of Moses. The law of Moses was something that God gave Moses as the baseline for how the Jews were supposed to live, to separate themselves from people who were living in the world and who were acting crazy. So God gave Moses the law, which back then had like over 600 different laws, and the 10 Commandments were a part of those laws, as a boundary to help protect the Jewish people. Because of that, another thing that happened back then was the Jews saw the Gentiles as unclean because the Gentiles did not follow the law of Moses. It kind of reminds me of that verse that says, "Bad company corrupts good character." God gave the Jews boundaries to live by, commandments to live by, to protect them and for them to prove their obedience to God. And so they didn't hang out with the Gentiles because they didn't have those same boundaries and they weren't living in the same way as the Jews, so they saw them as unclean. Going back to today's verse, what happened was God gave Peter a vision, and Peter is the one speaking in today's verse. Peter had a vision of God showing him food and saying, "Kill this and eat it." And Peter was like, "No, I can't eat it. That's considered unclean." And God responds and tells Peter that he can't consider something unclean that God considers clean. And he's talking about more than just food. He's talking about people. Because back then, the Jews saw Gentiles as unclean. And there was a very clear separation between the two groups of people. And Jesus is trying to teach them that his love is universal. His love doesn't discriminate. His love isn't just for the Jews, it's for every single person in the world. So in today's story, Cornelius is a Gentile. He was a Roman officer who became one of the first believers as a Gentile. This is Peter entering his house to tell him what God had told him, to tell him that God told him that he can't see him as unclean because he's also accepted into God's family if he follows God. So to put it plainly, pre-Jesus, the children of God had to follow a lot of rules to show their dependence on God and to stay obedient. Post-Jesus, Jesus accomplished the law. We still have to follow the law because it protects us, right? But it doesn't define our salvation. God is just trying to paint a picture that everyone is included in the opportunity of salvation. When I first read this, I should no longer think of anyone as impure or unclean. My first thought was, how often do us as believers look at others who are also believers and think that they're less deserving, or they're doing that, God must not be blessing their life, or at least I'm not doing that, I must be going somewhere good. And we kind of put this judgment on people. It can be seen as an unclean or clean mindset, but God is saying that he came for all of us. He doesn't measure certain levels of unclean. We're all unclean. We all fall short. We all fall into sin, which makes us all equal. And God is trying to relay that message that we are all equal, that Jesus came for every single human being on this planet to make us clean, to wipe us clean, to give us strength to be and stay clean. Today's verse really just reminds me of the kindness of God to teach us things that we need to know when we are blind to certain things. We live in a very different world than the world taking place in the Bible. But if you look at the timeline of how God had to reveal things and teach things, it all makes sense, because back then, God had to slowly reveal things. There was a moment when everyone was acting crazy, so he had to give Moses commands to help set boundaries for us, to help protect us, to help separate us from the world. And then there was a new layer of trying to teach them, okay, now we need to preach the message that everyone is included in this lifestyle, that everyone is able to follow Jesus, of course, after Jesus came. And it's cool to take that perspective and bring it into today's world, because God teaches us everything we need to know in the right time. I say that all the time, but it's true. And so if we have bias or area where we need to be corrected, God will show us. He will teach us. He will give us the download if we need it. All we have to do on our part is keep our eyes on him, develop relationship with him, pay attention when he's speaking. And if we're paying attention and he is our focus, we're not going to miss his voice. I should no longer think of anyone as impure or unclean. That is a really good statement to remember when we are feeling judgmental, when we are looking at someone in their past or what they're currently struggling in, and remind ourselves, if I think I'm considered clean by any standard, it wasn't my doing. It was Jesus. It was the God in me. So if someone else is struggling, who am I to judge? Because I too fell short. I too still fall short. And it just keeps you in that humble posture of, I am who I am today because of God. So this person also, the only way they're going to get through it is because of God. And God has us all on different timelines. Today's verse reminds me that love is more important than regulations. Love is more important than commands. It reminds me of how Jesus broke the commandment of working on the Sabbath to heal people, to show his love and compassion. Love is first. Love comes first. And if we keep love first, then we're able to follow the commandments, right? And if we keep love as our first priority, then we unify people. That's how the world comes together. That's how people stay in harmony with one another and love one another and uplift one another and stay out of judgment and all of the icky parts of us that really just block God from spreading his love throughout the world. Today's verse shows me that I need to stay in my lane and simply spread love, and that everyone is included in this walk with Jesus. Okay?